My name is Ellis, and for most of my life, I was the daughter they remembered last. Not forgotten, just filed somewhere beneath Sophie's achievements, beneath Cynthia's expectations, beneath the glossy image of what a Wren woman should be. I was the quiet one, the footnote at family dinners, the one they praised in past tense, if at all. I got my invitation on a Wednesday. Ivory envelope, gold filigree, the kind that usually holds wedding RSVPs or legacy fund appeals. But this time, it held something colder than a disinvite. It held a job posting. Entry-level marketing. No experience required. Stapled to my mother's birthday dinner invite like it was a favor. No apology. No recognition. Just a line at the bottom. Bring your resume, just in case someone useful attends. Useful. They didn't say my name. They said my absence. But I still came to the dinner. Not because they asked, but because they expected silence. They toasted Sophie that night, handed her a velvet folder with the house deed, or so they thought, called her the steward of the legacy, gave her a golden key, and smiled for the photographers like history was sealed. But the real deed? The real key? That had been mine for 4 years. I didn't interrupt their speech. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed a black box on the table. Small, unassuming, quiet. And when Cynthia finally opened it, the room went still. Everlyn Group LLC. Title holder. Ellis Wren. The dining room didn't applaud after that. They just stood. And rose. All rise. The woman they erased now owns the home they built on her silence. It was the kind of envelope you'd expect to find in a wedding pile. Ivory with gold filigree, the Wren family crest embossed at the center. I turned it over slowly, index finger tracing the seal like it might sting. My mother always had a flair for formality, even when the occasion didn't deserve it. I slid it open with the butter knife resting near my untouched toast. Inside, a folded letter on thick stationery, her familiar slanted cursive dancing across the page. Dearest Ellis, it began. Never just Ellis, never a simple hey. There was a line about the event, a dinner to celebrate her 60th birthday, a gathering of family and friends worth keeping. Typical. Then, stapled to the bottom of the letter was something else entirely. A printed job listing, neatly trimmed. I blinked once, then twice. Junior Marketing Coordinator. Entry level, dynamic environment, competitive pay. It wasn't even relevant to my field. I stared at it for a full minute before reaching for my coffee, my knuckles pale from the grip. The mug trembled slightly as I brought it to my lips. Steam curled over my cheek. I could almost hear her voice. Don't give up on finding purpose, dear. She wrote that every holiday card for the past 5 years. Passive-aggressive optimism. A mother's way of insisting that your current path isn't good enough, without having the courage to say it outright. My phone buzzed. Evan. You get the royal parchment yet? He asked, voice light. I did. There was silence for a beat. He knew me well enough not to push. Finally, I added. She stapled a job ad to it. Evan laughed, dry and sharp. A job ad? Was it at least in your city? No, I said. Entry-level marketing in Connecticut. He whistled. That's almost impressive. So, are you going? I swirled the coffee, watching the dark ripple. The maple tree outside swayed gently, leaves in descent. I think I will? Seriously? Not for them, I said quietly. For me. I could hear him smile. You sure you're ready? I've been ready for years, they just never noticed. After we hung up, I sat at the table and read the letter again. The tone was unmistakable, curt behind the cursive. Then, near the bottom, scrawled in a postscript, bring your resume, just in case someone useful attends. Useful. I folded the paper with precision, lining up each edge like I used to do with my thesis drafts. My fingers didn't shake. My eyes didn't sting. I felt something colder than anger. Cleaner. They thought they could embarrass me with a dinner party. They thought they could fold my worth into a resume and staple it to a seat assignment. I set the envelope aside and opened my laptop. If they're expecting weakness, I'll give them silence. Sophie jingled the golden key like she'd won a prize. I suppose she had. The air in Fairfield was sharper than I remembered, salted with the Atlantic and tinged with pine. The Wren family home stood as pristine as ever, its colonial white columns rising like sentinels over an autumn lawn trimmed to the inch. I parked at the curb, ignored the valet's half-curious glance, and walked up the familiar stone path alone. The door creaked open before I could knock. "Ellis?" Sophie beamed, framed by the soft glow of the chandelier. Her curls were styled into perfection, lips glossed, eyes just wide enough to perform sincerity. "You made it?" "Of course," I said. "It's Mom's 60th. She stepped aside. As I crossed the threshold, she lifted her hand with theatrical flourish and jingled the key ring dangling from two manicured fingers. Gold, ornate, undeniably expensive. My name was not etched on it. "Guess who finally gets to lock up at night?" She laughed. "Mom says it's tradition now. Symbolic or whatever." I smiled thinly. "Congratulations." She tilted her head, unsure if I meant it. The house hadn't changed. At least, not on the surface. Mahogany sideboards gleamed beneath curated family portraits. Floral arrangements sat like trophies in every corner. Guests milled about in polite clusters, second cousins, old neighbors, church friends. I nodded, offered smiles, received a few hesitant ones in return. Cynthia approached like a fragrance, silent but unavoidable. Her blazer was tailored, her pearls understated, and her smile just this side of insincere. "Darling," she said, touching my elbow, "how wonderful of you to join us." Before I could answer, she produced another envelope, white and heavy with expectation. She handed it to me like a relic. "For you." My breath stalled, but I kept my fingers steady as I took it. We both knew what this was. Not an apology. Never that. I opened it slowly, eyes flicking across the bold serif letters. "Explore your future in human resources. Now hiring. No experience needed." The pamphlet sparkled with cheerful stock photos, office people in mid-laugh, name badges, and coffee mugs. I turned the page over and found a note scrawled at the bottom. "There's a hiring event in Bridgeport next Tuesday. Thought it might be helpful?" I folded it once and tucked it into my clutch. My silence was the only way to retain dignity. "You know," Cynthia began, her voice coated in butter. "Sophie's really stepping up. Managing the house, helping with the foundation. She even reorganized the kitchen pantry." Sophie bounced over, practically glowing. "I had the locks changed yesterday. Not for safety, just for efficiency." "And taste," Cynthia added. "You should see what she's done with the guest suite." "Really?" I said lightly. "So, Sophie's the new manager of the estate?" "She'll be the one in charge soon enough," my mother replied, reaching for a glass of wine. "But we'd love to see you finally doing something." The words landed with a softness that stung sharper than any scream. I could feel eyes flicker toward me, some curious, some smug, others just bored. I'd seen this script before. Different event, same choreography. Cynthia played the benevolent queen, Sophie, the sparkling heir. And me, the wandering failure who never quite fulfilled the family brand. I straightened my shoulders. "You'll see soon enough what I've been doing." I left the pamphlet in my purse and the key in Sophie's palm. Some prizes, after all, came rigged. 4 years ago, this house nearly crumbled. They don't know who saved it, but I do. The October wind rustled the maple leaves as I stepped onto the back patio for air. Laughter floated from the kitchen, Sophie's bright, self-satisfied chirps, and Cynthia's silken tone trailing behind like ribbon. I closed my eyes, but the memory pressed in anyway, uninvited and crystal clear. Back to a winter night in 2020. I was in my corner office on Madison Avenue, the city humming low through the windows. A tray of takeout sat untouched beside my laptop, and the office light cast long shadows on spreadsheets of collapsing assets. It was late, close to midnight, when my phone buzzed. Voicemail. From home. I played it just in case. David's voice was frayed at the edges. Cynthia. The second loan didn't go through. The bank's deadline is Friday. If they foreclose, I don't know what we'll do. The recording cut off. I remember sitting still for a full minute. The Wrens had always lived beyond their means, always postured comfort with lacquered smiles and charity galas. But foreclosure? That wasn't posturing. That was panic. I could have called them, offered a solution directly. Let them know that their invisible daughter had grown into someone capable of helping. But no. Cynthia would have found a way to twist it. Praise Sophie for emotional support, or imply I was buying relevance. She'd rewrite the narrative before the ink dried. I wouldn't give her that chance. I picked up my phone and called Claire Stanton instead. Everlyn Group LLC, I told her. We form it tomorrow, quiet, clean, no fingerprints leading back to me. Claire blinked from her end of the video call, eyes narrowed beneath tortoiseshell glasses. You're buying the mortgage on your parents' house? I'm buying the debt, technically. Everlyn is. She leaned back. You'll be their landlord. They don't need to know that. The paperwork moved faster than I thought it would. Claire made sure of that. She didn't ask questions beyond the scope of legality. I wired the money, $980,000, anonymously through Everlyn, and watched the loan vanish from foreclosure lists like a magician's act. The Wrens celebrated a miraculous extension the next week, never wondering who lit the match that burned their debt away. When I met with Claire to sign final documents, she stared at me for a moment before sliding them across the table. "You sure you don't want credit for this?" she asked. "It's the kind of gesture that gets someone invited back into a family." I laughed. Not bitterly, just flat. "They'd ruin it," I said. "I want peace, not thanks." She hesitated, then nodded. Now, 4 years later, I stood in the very backyard I had salvaged from financial ruin. The hydrangeas still bloomed beside the porch swing. The same wrought iron lantern flickered at dusk. Sophie twirled her key inside, unaware that I'd once held the entire deed in my hands. They'd given her a key, shiny, hollow, performative, but I already owned the lock. The dining room gleamed. The conversation was sharp. The knives, sharper. Crystal chandeliers reflected in the polished surface of the mahogany table, casting prismatic light on the silverware. The smell of rosemary turkey mixed with vanilla-scented candles, a scent too perfect, too staged. Cynthia had orchestrated everything down to the color of the napkin rings. Gold, of course, legacy-colored. I sat 3 seats from the head of the table, hands folded in my lap, nodding politely to distant relatives I barely recognized. My place card said Ellis Wren, handwritten in a practiced cursive. Nothing about it screamed daughter. It read more like a guest. Sophie was seated beside Cynthia, an honor position, laughing with that bright, overachieving tone she always used when an audience was present. Her blonde hair curled perfectly around her shoulders. Her dress sparkled in candlelight. So did the golden key she now wore on a chain around her neck. "She just brings light to every room," Cynthia beamed, lifting her glass. "And tonight, we honor that. Sophie, darling, you've not only stood by this family, you've elevated it." David coughed quietly. He hadn't spoken much all evening, only sipped his wine and looked between plates. Evan caught my eye from across the table and gave the smallest, almost imperceptible shake of his head. I knew what he meant. Don't react. Not yet. But Cynthia was just getting started. As many of you know, she said, dabbing her lips with a napkin she hadn't dirtied. This house has stood in our family for 3 generations, and tonight, we officially pass the torch. A silver tray appeared, carried by a waiter hired for the evening. On it, a velvet folder embossed with our family crest. Sophie, Cynthia smiled, you've earned this. With grace, with dedication, with elegance, you are now the official steward of our home. There was clapping, toasting, the sound of crystal glasses clinking like tiny bells. Sophie reached for the folder, eyes misting with theatrical gratitude. Ellis? No one turned to me. No one mentioned me. I had been present, but not included. Evan cleared his throat barely audibly. His foot nudged mine under the table. I reached into my purse and closed my fingers around the cool leather surface of a small black box. I brought something too, I said, rising. The clinking stopped. Cynthia tilted her head ever so slightly. How thoughtful, dear. Sophie blinked, caught off guard. I walked slowly to the center of the table. No tremble, no apology. I placed the box carefully between the wine glasses, exactly in line with the roast turkey platter. It made the faintest sound, a soft thud against polished wood. Then I returned to my seat. No explanation, no flourish, just that small black box. Sitting, waiting. The silence it left behind was louder than applause. They gave her the house in words. I gave them the deed in ink. The black box sat untouched in the center of the table, drawing more attention than the gilded turkey or Cynthia's glistening cranberry compote. Forks hovered midair. Wine glasses paused mid-toast. The air had shifted. No longer celebratory, but coiled, expectant. Cynthia was the first to speak. Ellis, she said, too measured. Is this a joke? Sophie leaned forward, her manicured fingers twitching beside the velvet folder she'd received only minutes earlier. Her smile, still frozen, now cracked slightly at the corners. It's not, I said. But if you'd prefer to keep pretending, we can save it for dessert. The words slid out of me like silk, but inside, every nerve fired with quiet voltage. Evan hadn't moved, his gaze locked with mine, steady, grounding. Cynthia finally reached out and opened the box. Inside, laid flat against the satin lining, was a set of embossed legal documents, edges gilded, pages heavy. At the top, Everlyn Group LLC, property transfer and quiet title deed. Below that, in unmistakable print, beneficial owner, Ellis Wren. David's fork dropped with a clatter. What is this? Cynthia asked, not to me, but to the paper. It's a deed, I said calmly. Filed, notarized, binding. The house has been under Everlyn's ownership since March 2020. I purchased the mortgage when it was about to default. You? Sophie's voice cracked. I've been the legal owner ever since. She pushed her chair back. The room stayed frozen. Cynthia's eyes flicked across the pages, scanning, desperate. Her lips tightened. This can't be real. It's very real, came a voice, crisp, professional, now echoing from my phone on speaker. Claire Stanton, I said. My attorney. Claire's voice filled the dining room like a judge from a distant court. To whom it may concern, Everlyn Group LLC assumed the mortgage and title of the Wren residence in 2020, following an agreement with First Horizon Bank. The original owners were retained as tenants by default. As of today, we are activating Clause 4B, reclamation and voluntary departure, effective in 30 days. You can't do this, Cynthia stammered. You did this, I replied, voice steady. Sophie stood. Her key caught the candlelight one final time, and then slipped through her fingers. It hit the floor with a dull metallic clink that reverberated far too loudly for such a small thing. Cynthia's voice dropped to a whisper, brittle as glass. "What have you done?" I didn't answer. They weren't ready to hear it yet. I didn't raise my voice, but the silence after my gift screamed louder than any accusation. No one moved at first. The dining room, once orchestrated like a magazine cover, flawless centerpieces, polished crystal, curated laughter, now looked like a film set abandoned mid-scene, napkins askew, forks untouched. Sophie's key still lay on the floor, forgotten. Cynthia was the first to stir. "This," she hissed, her composure slipping like lacquer peeling off cheap furniture, "is still my house." She pushed back her chair with a jerk, the legs scraping violently against the parquet floor. "I built this home. I raised this family. I hosted senators here, Ellis. You think a folder and a lawyer's voice changes that?" I didn't flinch. "I don't think it. I insured it." Evan stood slowly, walked past the stunned guests, and disappeared toward the foyer. I knew where he was headed. My car. The envelope waiting in the glove box held the originals Claire had couriered just in time. David blinked at me, his brows furrowed in helpless spirals. "You bought the mortgage? Why would you do that?" "Because I heard the panic in your voice when you thought no one was listening," I replied. "Because I couldn't watch this house fall. But I also couldn't give you another weapon to turn against me." Sophie stood up abruptly, chair nearly toppling behind her. Her face was drained of color. "You're punishing us." I looked at her, not cruelly, but clearly. "I'm revealing the truth. What you do with it is your choice." She didn't answer. She just ran, heels pounding against the stairs, echoing through the once perfect home. Cynthia turned back to me, trembling with fury barely masked behind pearls and practiced dignity. "You've made a fool of this family, in front of guests." "They're gone," I said. "They left when they realized the performance ended." She opened her mouth, but my phone rang before she could speak. Claire's name lit up the screen. I answered on speaker. "Ellis," Claire said, voice crisp, delivery confirmed. "All documents notarized, filed, and logged. The property is legally bound to Everlynn's custody. 30-day voluntary departure begins tonight." Cynthia bristled. "We're not going anywhere." I tilted my head. "You told me I had no place in this home, so I bought it." Evan returned, handing the sealed folder to me. I placed it gently on the table, beside the now wilted centerpiece. "Evidence, not decoration." Claire's voice cut in again. "If they resist, I'll begin proceedings next Friday." The silence that followed didn't just settle, it weighed. When control slips from the proud, they don't collapse. They crack. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Wren living room, touching the edges of polished surfaces like it didn't know any better. The same room that had hosted countless fundraisers, portraits, performances, now held silence like a verdict. Cynthia sat on the edge of the tufted settee, still in her silk robe, but it hung differently now, wrinkled, untied. The folder of legal documents lay open on the coffee table. Her glasses slid halfway down her nose as she flipped pages with trembling fingers. David stood by the fireplace, not speaking. He hadn't said much since last night, only watched. His eyes moved from the title page, deed transfer, Everlyn Group LLC, to me, then back again. "I don't understand how this happened," Cynthia muttered. "David, you were supposed to handle the taxes, the paperwork. How didn't you notice?" He shrugged. "You were the one who handled the house." "No, I managed the social side," she snapped. "I managed the face. I assumed—" She stopped, swallowed. "You assumed I'd stay invisible. I said from the hallway, stepping into view. Sophie's voice called out faintly from upstairs. Mom? Cynthia didn't answer. She picked up her phone, dialed, then hung up. Then tried again. Why isn't Alan answering? She said to herself, referring to their longtime attorney. He owes us this. He retired, I said. Last year. I think I read about it in the Chamber Herald. Cynthia froze. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. I didn't gloat. I just stood. Evan entered quietly, holding 2 coffees. He handed me one without a word and sank onto the arm of a chair. Cynthia gave him a withering glance but said nothing. Sophie finally appeared, barefoot, hoodie zipped to her chin. She looked younger than usual, stripped of makeup and the posture of privilege. She came down the stairs slowly, then stopped when she saw me. You planned this, she said, voice hoarse. No, I replied. I prepared for this. There's a difference. You always hated me. I blinked once. The statement didn't sting. It didn't even surprise me. I never hated you, I said calmly. I just stopped protecting you. Her face twisted. What does that even mean? It means I used to shield you from consequences. Now I let you feel them. She turned toward Cynthia, seeking alliance, but Cynthia was too deep in legal terminology, tracing margins for non-existent loopholes. Evan sipped his coffee, eyes on the floor. Then he looked up at me and said softly, They're not mad because they lost. They're mad you never asked permission to win. That settled in the air like dust. David shifted, cleared his throat. I think, he said slowly, voice low, uncertain. I think we need to leave. No one answered. Even the house, finally, felt quiet enough to listen. They said I bought the house. What they don't know is, I paid for it long before that. The study smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I rarely came in here, not because it wasn't mine, but because I never needed reminders. But tonight, I needed all of them. The drawer creaked slightly as I unlocked it. Inside, everything was perfectly arranged. Files, dates, correspondence in labeled folders. I reached for the one marked Wren Property, 2020. My fingers paused briefly on the tab before pulling it out. The bank's original notice was still crisp. Final warning, foreclosure imminent. The numbers glared up at me. $1.26 million due in principal, interest, and penalties. I remembered the night it arrived. The muffled phone calls through my apartment wall. Cynthia's panicked whisper through clenched teeth. We'll lose everything, David. Everything. I hadn't planned to help. I'd wanted to let them fall. But something, some piece of the old me, still couldn't bear to watch them drown without a rope. So I'd tied one in silence, not out of love, out of obligation. Maybe guilt. Claire's voice crackled to life through the speaker. You're up late, she said. I found the first letter, I murmured, laying the notice beside a copy of the deed transfer. I wanted to remind myself what it really cost. Claire sighed gently. You know they'll never thank you. They already did, I said, by proving they didn't deserve it. We talked briefly. She confirmed again that full legal ownership rested with Everlyn. There were no cracks in the walls I'd built. No way around the clauses, the signatures, the timestamps. It was airtight. After the call ended, I sat back and listened to the silence, until it wasn't silent anymore. Cynthia's voice, etched from memory, played in my mind like an echo. It's a miracle, really. We had a friend in finance, pulled some strings. We fought so hard to keep the house. We earned it. I had stood in the foyer that day, unseen behind the stairwell, while she performed her version of the truth to neighbors and donors and distant relatives. The applause, the nods, the admiration. All of it, built on money she hadn't earned, and silence I had never broken. Evan knocked lightly before stepping in. Didn't mean to interrupt. You're not, I said, gesturing to the chair. Just walking through old debts. He glanced at the papers. You kept everything? Of course. I handed him the statement. The sum, circled in red. My signature at the bottom of the Everlyn acquisition file. I didn't just buy the deed, Evan, I said quietly. I bought their narrative. I paid for every fake speech, every social climb, every polished lie they told about how they saved this place. He didn't respond right away. They used my money, my name, and my silence, and I let them. He looked at me then, not with pity, but something heavier. Why now? Because this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about reclaiming the truth. My phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Claire Stanton. Sophie is trying to contact the bank directly. I'm blocking all moves. I didn't curse. I didn't panic. I just closed the drawer and locked it again. The past was theirs to twist. But the present? That was mine. When power is slipping, desperation makes even the pampered dangerous. The reception area of the downtown law office smelled of leather and expensive cologne. Sophie sat perched on the edge of a velvet chair, her manicured fingers drumming an erratic beat on a thick manila folder. Her lips were painted too red for this early in the day. Her eyes were wild with something that wasn't anger, but panic barely disguised as defiance. The assistant led her into a meeting room with glass walls and chrome finishes. Across from her sat a junior partner from Claire Stanton's firm, a man in his early 30s with sharp eyes and a sharper suit. Beside him, a senior account manager from First Federal Bank flipped through Sophie's documents with professional indifference. These are copies, the bank rep said, flipping another page. From over 4 years ago. Nothing here invalidates the current deed. In fact, he held up a notarized sheet. This proves the ownership transition was fully legal and binding. Sophie leaned forward. But my family didn't approve it. My mother and father had no idea. And that, said the young lawyer, isn't legally relevant. The house was purchased through Everlyn Group LLC. It met all federal and state requirements. Ms. Ellis Wren, as the acting authority behind the LLC, executed all steps properly. Sophie's voice cracked. She tricked everyone. The lawyer's eyes flicked toward the bank rep, who shifted uncomfortably. Miss Wren had no legal obligation to disclose herself as the purchaser. It was a third-party sale. Your family's failure to investigate the transaction doesn't constitute fraud. Her hands trembled now, knuckles white around the folder. Just then, the office phone rang. The assistant stepped in, whispered something to the lawyer. He nodded and turned on the speakerphone. "This is Claire Stanton," came the voice, cool and unshaken. "Ms. Wren, I suggest you leave this office now." Sophie stiffened. "You can't intimidate me." "I'm not trying," Claire replied. "But I am reminding you, any further interference will be considered obstruction. You've already attempted to manipulate a financial institution under false pretenses. One more step, and we'll escalate." Sophie's face burned red. "I'm not letting her erase me." "No one's erasing you, Sophie," Claire said. "But Ellis no longer exists in your family's shadow. She never did." The call clicked off. Sophie stood slowly, as if her limbs weighed twice their normal amount. She collected the folder, barely meeting the lawyer's eyes. Outside, she shoved the papers into her purse and stormed down the street, boots clacking against the sidewalk. Her breath came in short, furious bursts. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed in my lap. "Claire Stanton. We're clear." But she's planning something personal. I didn't have to guess. Whatever it was, it wouldn't be legal, and it wouldn't be quiet. They used to give me blank stares. Now they're begging for blank pages. The office was quieter than usual. Maybe it was the overcast sky filtering gray light through the windows, or maybe it was just the sense that something, Something final was happening. Claire's conference room didn't have the chill of judgment halls or the weight of courtroom tension. It was precise, clean, surgical, like all the damage had already been done. Now it was time to stitch the wound shut. I sat across from her, hands resting on a black folder thick with signatures, notarized stamps, and intent. Claire adjusted her glasses as she flipped to the final tab, the kind of quiet efficiency only someone who'd seen enough broken families could master. "This is the final packet," she said. "It serves formal notice to vacate within 14 business days. Filed under Jurisdictional Code 43A, subsection 6. She looked up. "We're not asking anymore." I nodded. "Good." Evan leaned against the doorframe, watching us both. He hadn't said much since we entered, but his presence was a quiet anchor. Just enough gravity to remind me this wasn't a dream, or a hallucination born out of too many years of swallowing humiliation. Claire turned a page and slid it toward me. "This is your signature block. Below it, we'll deliver certified letters to Cynthia, David, and Sophie. If they choose not to comply, we can begin eviction procedures within 72 hours. "Do it," I said without hesitation. She gave a small nod, respectful. Evan raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you don't want to do this? Personally?" I glanced at him, then back at the paperwork. The ink was already in the pen. My name was already on every page except this last one. This one was ceremonial. "They already left me years ago," I said, pressing the pen to paper. "This is just paperwork." It felt oddly weightless, the act of signing. No rush of adrenaline, no imaginary thunder, just ink and peace. Claire gathered the papers, double-checked each seal, then slipped the folder into her briefcase. "If they contact you," she said, "refer them to me. If they show up at your place, call Evan first, then call me." He gave her a thumbs up, amused. "I've got her." She stood, smoothing her blazer. "Ellis, you did everything by the book. Whatever happens next, you've already won." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Outside, the rain had begun, a soft pattering against the windows. It was the kind of rain that didn't wash things away, but made everything stick. Real. Evan opened the umbrella and walked with me down the steps, back toward the car. He held the door open, and once we were both seated inside, he looked at me. "You ready to live there?" I stared through the windshield, watching the raindrops slide down like tiny compass needles, all pointing home. For the first time, yes. I gave them 30 days. They wasted 29 pretending I didn't mean it. The letter felt heavier in my hand than I expected. Not because of the paper, it was crisp, legal stock, but because of what it meant. The house I once wandered through as a shadow was now mine, undeniably, and the people who once ignored my silence were now forced to confront it. I parked on the circular driveway just after 10. The air was damp with the scent of dying leaves, and somewhere, distantly, a neighbor's dog barked once and fell silent. Evan didn't join me this time. He knew this was something I had to do alone. Inside, the house was unnervingly quiet. No classical music humming through the speakers, no clinking silverware in the kitchen. Just Cynthia, perched in the sitting room like a queen out of favor. Sophie lingered in the hall, arms crossed, pretending she wasn't waiting. I didn't offer greetings. I simply stepped forward and laid 3 sealed envelopes on the entry table, each with their names printed in embossed font. Cynthia didn't reach for hers. She stared at me instead, that same polished calm she wore like pearls. "I assume this is your final act of defiance," she said smoothly. "No," I replied. "This is my act of clarity." She glanced down at the envelope, still not touching it. "We're not going anywhere." I met her gaze. "Then we'll stop pretending this was ever a family matter." Behind me, David entered the room. He looked tired, not just in the eyes but in the bones. He opened his envelope, skimmed the contents. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Ellis," he said softly, "is there another way?" "This is the other way," I said. Sophie let out a short, bitter laugh. "You've always waited for a moment like this, haven't you? Just to humiliate us." I didn't look at her. I waited for the truth to matter. She snatched her envelope, tore it open, and let the pages spill across the floor. "You don't get to erase us." I stepped past the scattered pages, my heels quiet on the hardwood. "You erased me years ago. I just took the pen back." Her jaw twitched. "I should have known you couldn't handle being ignored." "You should have known I was listening." She stormed upstairs. A door slammed hard enough to rattle the chandelier. Cynthia stood, slow, deliberate. She picked up her envelope, walked to the fireplace, and tossed it into the flames. The corner curled first, then the seal split, ink bleeding into fire. "There," she whispered. "That's what I think of your little letter." I didn't flinch. I didn't need her to read it. Claire had already sent the digital copies, with red receipts. "Feel free to burn the house next," I said. "But you'll still have to leave the ashes behind." Her eyes narrowed, but I turned before she could form a response. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the November air bit at my skin. I walked slowly back to the car, letting the cold settle into my collarbones, letting it remind me I was alive, that I had done this not out of vengeance, but necessity. The phone buzzed. Claire. Her message was simple. "Want me to file for forcible removal preemptively?" I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then I typed, "Not yet. Not yet. But soon." They ignore me for years, but they'll listen to the one person they still respect. The scent of rosemary and old paper welcomed me before Edith even opened the door. Her house hadn't changed since I was a child. Brass light fixtures, worn rugs that had seen generations, and that steady hum of silence only found in places built on discipline and memory. She ushered me in with a gentle nod. No questions, just the warmth of familiarity, and perhaps something more, recognition. I had texted her just once. "Need to talk. Just us." She replied with the address and the time, as if she had been expecting it. We sat in her sunroom, filtered with golden light that made even dust look graceful. Evan stayed in the car, understanding that some conversations needed no audience. "I suppose this is about the house," Edith said, folding her hands over a porcelain teacup. I looked at her. "You knew?" Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "Dear, I knew the moment the foreclosure notice disappeared off record. Your mother was too busy spinning miracles. I recognized your handwriting on the file envelope, too." I blinked. "You stayed silent all these years?" "You asked for peace," she said simply. "I honored that. But peace is not the same as invisibility. And I think, now, you're ready to be seen." She reached beside her and produced a small, bound packet of documents. My own early paperwork from Everlyn Group. I stared. "Kept a copy," she said. "Just in case the family memory failed." I exhaled slowly. "They think I ambushed them." "They prefer fantasy to shame," Edith said. "But that's no longer your burden." She stood, slowly, but with purpose, and walked to the landline on the counter. "Let me make a call." I froze. "Are you sure?" "I'm old, Ellis. I've earned the right to ruin a dinner or two." She dialed. The phone rang. Once, twice. Then I heard Cynthia's voice crackle faintly through the receiver. "Edith?" "I watched Ellis save what you nearly ruined," Edith said, not wasting a single breath. "You owe her. Not just legally, morally. She cleaned your mess without asking for thanks, and you turned her into a stranger." Silence. Then David's voice. Edith, we didn't know. You didn't want to know, she interrupted. And now that truth has arrived, don't you dare hide from it. Because if Ellis decides to remove you all tomorrow, she'd still be kinder than you ever were. She hung up. I stared at her, stunned. Thank you. Edith looked at me, firm. That wasn't for you. That was for them. You don't need my defense. You built your own armor. The front door creaked. We both turned. Sophie stood at the threshold, eyes wide, frozen. She hadn't knocked. She hadn't announced herself. But she had heard everything. I rose slowly. Her face was pale, cheeks blotched with confusion, or guilt. You followed me? I asked. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Edith didn't flinch. If you have a conscience, this is the time to use it. Sophie looked between us, then down. For once, she had no words. And that was the most honest thing she'd done in years. My old room smelled like cardboard and dust, just like they left me. The floorboards groaned the way they used to when I crept in past curfew, not that anyone ever waited up. The hallway was dim, filtered with gray morning light. I moved slowly, careful not to wake anyone. Not yet. This was a visit I had to make alone. The door to my childhood room stuck a little before it gave way with a sigh. Inside, the air was dry, musty, and cold. Everything was still here, and yet nothing was. They hadn't preserved it like a shrine, the way some families do. There were no trophies lined neatly on shelves, no childhood photos lovingly dusted, just boxes, mismatched, anonymous, labeled in Cynthia's handwriting. Holiday linens, tax files, MISC. Not a single one said Ellis. The bed had no sheets. The window blinds hung uneven. My old bookshelf had been emptied, replaced with Sophie's extra shoes at some point, judging by the glittering heels shoved into corners. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought this room never belonged to anyone. But the desk was still there. I knelt, brushing off the thin film of dust, and opened the top drawer. Beneath a dried-out pen and a broken rubber band, I found it. An envelope, yellowed and brittle at the edges. To Mom. Please read. The handwriting was mine, slanted, still learning how to spell emotion. I stared at it for a long time. The seal wasn't broken. I sat on the floor, fingers tracing the paper. I couldn't remember what 12-year-old me had written, but I remembered the hope. The night I slipped it into her purse, heart racing, praying she'd read it and see me differently. That maybe if I used the right words, she'd soften. She never mentioned it, never handed it back. She just filed it away. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Instead, I stood and pulled a blank notepad from my bag, along with a pen. I sat at the desk, cleared a small space, and wrote slowly, neatly, every stroke deliberate. You had a daughter. You still do. But you chose a ghost. I folded the page, placed it on the old pillow where my head used to rest, and smoothed it down. Then I turned, ready to leave. Sophie stood in the hallway. Her eyes were puffy. She wasn't wearing makeup, and her robe hung open at the collar. She looked exhausted. How long have you been there? I asked. Long enough. We stared at each other. The silence between us buzzed with years of things neither of us had ever said. Her voice cracked. Are you really going to make us leave? I looked at her. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just the calm that comes when the fighting is over. No, I said. You already did. They didn't say goodbye, and I didn't need them to. The fog hung over Fairfield like a final curtain, dense and still. From where I sat in the car, engine off, breath fogging the inside glass, the house looked like something out of a forgotten painting. Familiar, distant, already belonging to someone else. The moving truck was parked crookedly across the driveway, its back yawning open. No fanfare. No dramatic exits. Just quiet. Muffled thuds of boxes being loaded one after another. No raised voices. No weeping. Just departure. Evan sat beside me, hands folded in his lap. He hadn't said much since we arrived. Didn't need to. There are some moments you don't talk through. You just witness. Sophie emerged from the front door first, clutching a stack of photo albums and a half-closed box. Her hair was tied back, face bare, expression unreadable. She didn't glance in our direction. Instead, she handed the box off to a mover, then returned inside without a word. David followed minutes later with 2 suitcases and an old coat tossed over his shoulder. He paused at the edge of the porch. His eyes met mine across the driveway. He gave a nod, small, almost involuntary. Then he turned and kept walking. Cynthia was last. She didn't carry anything, just stepped outside with her purse slung tightly under one arm and a scarf clutched in her hand. For a moment she stood on the threshold, not moving. I wondered if she would turn around. Look back. Say something. She didn't. Her heels clicked once on the stone porch, then again on the top step. And then she was down, across the gravel, disappearing behind the truck like fog swallowed her whole. I waited, watched as the door of the truck shut with a final hollow clunk. The engine rumbled to life, the brake lights flashed, and slowly, deliberately, the truck pulled away. They didn't look back. The porch was empty, almost, except for one thing, a flash of gold. Sophie had left the key, the one she used to twirl in her fingers like a crown. It sat on the top step, glinting in the weak November sun, small and quiet and heavy with meaning. I opened the car door. The cold air hit like a baptism. I didn't rush. I walked slowly up the drive, past the garden bed she once micromanaged, past the tree where I scraped my knee when I was 6, up the 3 steps, past the golden key. And then I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out mine. Solid. Real. I turned to face the door, exhaled, and whispered, "This time, it's mine." The walls didn't change, but the silence did. It belongs to me now. The sun filtered through the windows in long, clean lines, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air. It was quiet, but not empty. Not anymore. I moved slowly, barefoot on the hardwood floors, letting my steps echo softly through the hallway. The space felt bigger without their voices, their judgments, their presence pressing against the walls like an invisible weight. With every door I opened, with every curtain I pulled wide, light flooded in where shadows had long held court. In the kitchen, I moved the chairs around the table just slightly, enough to say, "This is mine now." In the living room, I opened the windows, letting crisp November air rush through. The house breathed with me, finally. Upstairs, the old guest bedroom would become an office. My office. I imagined files and blueprints where throw pillows used to sit uselessly. Plans would be made here. Futures shaped. I returned to the foyer, pulled open the drawer of the old sideboard, and placed a single brass key inside. It was new, engraved. Wren Ellis. Not Wren family, not Sophie, not legacy. Just mine. My phone buzzed on the counter. A voicemail from Claire. "Everything's finalized. Title's clear. Probate complete. No contest filed. Congratulations, Ellis." I let the words settle. Then I sat at the kitchen table, pulled out a clean notebook, and began to write. "Dear future me, you did it. Not to hurt them. Not to win. Just to remember that you were never nothing." I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just wrote until the words slowed down on their own. Behind me, Evan leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching. "If you had to do it all again?" he asked. "Every step? Would you?" I looked up. "Every quiet second," I said. There was a beat. a stillness that wasn't waiting for anything, just existing. Then the doorbell rang. I stood, walked to the front door, and opened it. A woman stood there, clipboard in hand, a smile tucked into the corner of her mouth. Hi, you still planning to open that Elder Services Center here? I stepped aside, gestured into the sunlight-drenched hallway, and smiled back. Right on schedule. After years of being dismissed, overlooked, and treated like a temporary guest in her own bloodline, Ellis didn't just reclaim the house. They were forced to see who had truly held the foundation together all along. The silence they weaponized against her became her sharpest reply, and every forgotten wound was answered not with a scream, but a signature. In the end, she didn't raise her voice. She raised the deed. She didn't destroy them. She let the truth do it. Because real justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in with quiet papers, airtight clauses, and a gaze that no longer asks for approval. What they called betrayal was simply Ellis refusing to stay erased. What they saw as revenge was correction. Justice isn't instant, but it never misses its mark. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. Comment 1 if you've ever been silenced but stood back up. Comment 2 if you believe Ellis should have pushed even further.